everyone, it's Monday and I'm here today to talk to you about narcissistic personality disorder. But before I start, I wanted to just thank everybody for the follows and the nice comments and everything and all the views. I didn't expect that, especially so early on, so that was a nice surprise, and I'm glad that some of you are enjoying the video. Well, there's something more yet, but today there's another one. Thank you very much for the comments and everything, and I hope you guys keep watching. So NPD is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while because it is the most currently demonized personality disorder that there is out there. And it's also the most misunderstood currently, aside from probably borderline personality disorder. That's probably more misunderstood. Pardon me, my nose itches. But narcissism is the most demonized currently. And the problem with that is that it doesn't give a realistic view of several things about this personality disorder. One of them being that it doesn't take into consideration the origin of the disorder, which is that it is a coping mechanism that comes from, childhood abuse. It exists in a spectrum, so not everybody is this grandiose narcissist that's going to destroy your entire life and, steal all your money and your lovers and your family and your husband and your dog. It's just not like that. There certainly are some unhealthy people and they can be very destructive, but usually it's on a smaller scale. And you're absolutely able to get out before it gets that bad. There are warning signs, and also at the same time, narcissists, when they're on the more high functioning end of the scale, nobody else can achieve glory the way a narcissist can in reality, because that inflated sense of self, that sense of entitlement, that ego, all those things can serve you incredibly well if you want to be a performer, for instance, or reach the very top of your field, and then end up being on the news because of it, because that's what they probably end up doing. It's like they not only reach the top of their field, you see them in 5 years down the road and you're like, oh, there's that guy that I went to high school with, why is he on the news? And it's not for something bad, it's for something good. So narcissism can actually be something that really serves people well for achieving their goals if they are a well-functioning person and they've hopefully received some therapy, if medication is needed, all that sort of thing. Like I'm always saying, therapies are always needed, like CBT, but these people can be incandescent when they're at their best. They can have a sense of humor about their ego. They can have, instead of being the kind of person that is constantly, making up stories about all these amazing things that they are and did and have and people that they know, and it's usually all bullshit. Instead of that, you get people who have an actual solid sense of ego when they're on the more functioning scale. Sorry, my nose is just so itchy. I've got cat hair all over the place. Of course, these are disorders, which means people generally are disordered when they have these personality conditions, but they exist in a scale. It's all, you can be on one end or the other, and at the healthiest end of it, it's really, it can serve you very well, is what I'm trying to say. So there's all these things that can take into consideration, and then you have on top of that the criteria that you need to be actually diagnosed with NPD is pretty intensive. So I'm going to be reading from the DSM to let you guys know what is required from a clinician to diagnose you with NPD, and then just all the different symptoms and personality bits. Sorry, this is I tried to do this video several times and something kept going wrong the entire time, so this is my 47 millionth try. That's barely an exaggeration, so you're just gonna have to kind of bear with me if I'm at a loss for words at this point, because once again it's 2 in the morning. I always do this at 2 in the morning. So before the person even gets the diagnostic criteria from the DSM, they have to do sort of an assessment of the person, and it is based on several things: appearance, behavior, speech, affect, thought content, thought process, cognition, insight, judgment, impulse control. These are all things that are taken into consideration with the narcissistic personality disorder. For instance, appearance. The clinician should note the patient's general grooming and fashion choices. Clothing, accessories, hairstyles, or tattoos that are provoking may suggest NPD, as there is a sense of grandiosity and attention-seeking behavior characteristic of the disorder. Now, clearly not every person in the world with a tattoo has got narcissistic personality disorder. That would be absurd, because it's almost unusual not to have tattoos these days. They're talking about specific provoking tattoos, if you notice the language. That would mean tattoos that are meant to shock, oftentimes like of a sexual nature, that sort of thing, which my tattoos most certainly are not. So, and then the clothing style, often you'll find people who attach a lot of importance to designer clothing and having that status. Like, status is extremely important to NPD, generally speaking. Behavior. The clinician should monitor for disinhibited behaviors, grandiose postures, smirking and scoffing. They mention smirking and scoffing because one of the markers of NPD is it's really, despite all the grandiosity and the ego, it's really covering up a very low sense of self-esteem and a low sense of self-worth. I mean, it's rock bottom, and it comes from child abuse. And of course, when you've been abused as a child, your sense of self-worth is going to be fairly low. And this is in particular people who are prone to NPD. It's just, that's what got them the most, is their sense of self-worth. That's what was destroyed the most thoroughly, and so that's why they have the disorder. And so they're always trying to reclaim their sense of self-worth, and they do it in the most unhealthy ways, of course, but as I said, harnessed properly, it can actually be a very good thing. And so the scoffing, I'm sorry, I got lost there for a minute. You'll find often that people with NPD will always be that person who makes a snide, shitty comment to you about your appearance, or the one in your Facebook groups will always be like the one to put people down and say seemingly unprovoked things. And it's usually based on just some sense of needing to make themselves look better, or maybe they're jealous of that person about something, or like they didn't like something they said. Who knows what it is, but it's always a sense of having to elevate their own sense of self-worth by putting other people down. And the whole smirking sarcasm thing is to be like, yeah, whatever, you're nothing and I'm something because I'm superior. That, that whole, we all have seen it before, certainly. Speech. NPD may present with an increased amount of speech due to feelings of needing to prove oneself or brag about achievements and friendships. There are no expected concerns with speech initiation, volume, or vocabulary. So you can have any vocabulary, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean they be shouting at you. It's just the content of what they're talking about. Increased speech, which I can give you a great example of this, actually. This person that I almost dated but did not, because goodness gracious, they were definitely on the Grandiose Narcissist scale, and despite talking all the time about how they were in recovery, you would never know it once you met them in person. But they could literally, I timed it once actually on my phone, could talk about themselves for an hour and a half straight. I mean, when you're trying to have a conversation, and the conversation, they would always circle it back to themselves. And finally I just kind of gave up, and I was curious to see how long it could go on. And they just kept going and talking about themselves more, and I was sitting there rather disinterestedly, because I knew it was all nonsense and made up. And so, but the more he would notice that I was sort of just not impressed, the more he would say things to try to be impressive, like more grandiose lies, more, the more impressive people that he knew. He actually tried to tell me that his therapist was the woman who was the therapist who wrote the book Sybil, which is a person who had multiple personality disorder, now known as DID, which seems extremely unlikely to me, because he's, my age, and that was back in I believe the 50s. So, in any case, just things like that. And, he told me he knew Donald Trump, and I'm thinking, you think I'm going to be impressed with you knowing Donald Trump? Have you talked to me at all? I mean, it was just ridiculous, and it just kept getting worse and worse in terms of all the grandiose lies. And it was this constant prattle, much like I'm doing right now. Affect is, oops, I lost my spot. Sorry. Affect is highly variable but may fluctuate greatly depending on the conversation topic, particularly if the patient with NPD feels challenged or threatened by the interviewer, in which case more lability is expected than usual with frequent irritability. So that's easy to translate there. If they feel challenged by what you're telling them, or you're challenging them, sorry, I'm sitting on my foot here, and they will feel threatened, then they'll become a lot more unstable in their moods, and a lot more irritable towards you, perhaps even be explosive, which I've certainly noticed before. My mother was a diagnosed grandiose narcissist, which is why this is a subject kind of close to my heart, although she was very unhealthy and abusive, and not all narcissists are as abusive as my mother was. She was kind of off the charts, but they can be certainly very abusive people because they are extremely miserable and unhappy and bitter people. The ones that are the most unhealthy, of course. And as I keep saying, these things exist in a spectrum. Some people are less affected than others. There are different degrees, varying degrees of narcissism. Some kind of trying to give you a different opposite ends of the scale, like when they're at their best, how they can be just incandescently amazing high achievers that will go beyond anyone's expectations, and at the lowest, just these people who have literally no sense of self-worth, but to make up for it, they constantly put other people down, try to make other people feel like shit. They can be intimidating in how aggressive they are in it, if you're the kind of person to be intimidated, in other words, and many people are intimidated by it. My mother had skinheads afraid of her. I was part of an anti-Nazi skinhead group when I still have the haircut pretty much, anti-Nazi skinhead group when I was in high school. And this guy I was dating at the time came home, and my mother was there. He was there with me. And when he was leaving, he was like, "Your mom is terrifying." And he wasn't being ironic. She was terrifying. I mean, it's probably why I'm pretty fearless now. She taught me to be not afraid of anybody, because if I could survive her, I could survive pretty much anything. And I really have literally no fear response anymore. Let's see, where are we? Thought content. It is essential to assess for delusions in patients with NPD. The level of grandiose thought may border between non-delusional grandiose thoughts and delusional psychotic grandiose thoughts, which, again, the spectrum thing. It can be on the low end, or it can be literally psychotic. So that can tell you which, what I've been trying to say is that it's not every narcissist is this exact same person. They're not cookie cutter. They don't all have the exact same degree and intensity of dysfunction. Let's see. Thought process. The thought process of NPD is generally concrete, with grandiosity being unchallengeable. Still, the individuals have capacity for linear and logical thought, often used to achieve their initial accomplishments, like higher education, careers, and relationships of status. So as I was saying, they are capable of being logical and having discipline, and they're not all over the place. They are able to be very focused at their best, and can use, as I said, their grandiosity in their favor. Cognition. General cognition and orientation are not expected to be impaired in NPD, but should be evaluated to rule out other psychiatric conditions. So they're generally not considered to be like typically mentally ill people unless they have other comorbidities going on. Insight. NPD is an egosyntonic disorder. Therefore, a patient's understanding of their own NPD is generally poor. Accepting self-deficit is usually not congruent with an NPD. God forbid there is something wrong with them, or they have a disorder. It's very hard to accept, because their disorder is based upon this, the structure is based upon their superiority, and they're being the best at everything, and having this massive ego, and because it really is covering something that's very insecure, being challenged on that and being told that there's something wrong is unacceptable. So it's very hard for people with NPD, particularly the more low-functioning ones, to recognize that there is an actual problem, which can be difficult if you're in a relationship with one of those particular types, particularly an untreated grandiose narcissist. Or they're just the one. They're like, my mother was literally the dragon lady. Okay, not literally, but she like dragon lady in terms of, you know, not Game of Thrones dragon lady, but evil. Although she did turn evil, didn't she? So maybe. Sorry, I'm just now I'm thinking about Game of Thrones because squirrel. My focus is not all here right now. I've been trying to do this video. This is, I don't even know how many attempts this is with this one, but something keeps going wrong, like the file gets messed up, or it turns out that it wasn't recording properly, or the sound is screwed up, or I realized it looked like a hag beast or something. I don't know, like it's just, so I'm trying again. And hopefully this will be the best one. So now the NPD DSM-5 criteria, after all that, now they have to go through the criteria and see if you meet this criteria. You have to meet 5 out of the 9. If you recall, the ASPD only had to meet 3 out of, actually, we haven't done that one yet, have we? Yeah, I'm going to be doing the ASPD woman after this, so never mind. But they have less of an stringent criteria. Okay, so 1, having a grandiose sense of self-importance, such as exaggerating achievements and talents, expecting to be recognized as superior even without commensurate achievements. So as I was mentioning with that that gentleman, I knew he would brag and brag and brag and make things up, but there was nothing actually to back it up. There were a couple of accomplishments. Usually there's like 1 or 2 bits of truth in there, hopefully, but not always. Really, it's all, you know, because they want to be viewed and seen in a certain way. There's a status attached to it, and they believe that being able to say that they've done all these things and have all these things and have the prettiest wife and the most money and the coolest car and like the alpha male kind of thing, you know. But women obviously are narcissists too. The alpha female, I don't know, which is all such bullshit. But anyway, they would be like the perfect personification of that whole thing. Preoccupation with fantasies of success, power, beauty, and idealization. Those, as I said, those preoccupations can be what lead to their ultimate success, though, which can be incredible. Because as I was saying, no one can achieve the way an NPD person can when they are really, really motivated and have the talent to back it up and the drive. They can be really amazing people and achieve, instead of just bragging about things that they don't have and making all this nonsense up to make themselves look better. They actually have the reality to back it up because they have made these achievements, they've reached their goals. And so they kind of deserve to have a big ego at that point, but hopefully they've learned to maybe tone it down a little, who knows. A belief in being special and that they can only be understood by or associated with other high-status people or institutions. Yeah, these are the people who will be really rude to the wait staff and then like fawning to the people that they believe are like above them in status, who they believe they can use to make themselves look better, that sort of thing. If you fall beneath their notice, you're basically nothing. A sense of entitlement. Most definitely, they tend to feel entitled to whatever it is they feel that they deserve. They don't have to necessarily work for it. I mean, if you're making things up that, you know, you've achieved all these things that you never really have done, certainly there's a sense of entitlement involved with all that. Exploitation behaviors, which of course is, you know, the whole thing about NPDs, the way they are in relationship, their messed up attachment style, which is very exploitative towards their partners. They use them to build up their egos and to feed them their supply, as it's called, which is like basically literally feeding their ego to make them feel that they're loved and admired. And then they'll discard you when they're done with you, but usually they'll kind of keep you on retainer in case they need you again. And hopefully, if you have the self-respect to recognize what's going on, you won't be in their little stable of, you know, people. But as I always say, you know, people can only treat you as bad as you let them. When you're an adult with agency, and you can make choices, and you see these red flags and you choose to get involved anyway, that's a problem. So, look out for the red flags, and, don't get involved with someone like this if you don't think it's going to be something that's going to make you happy. And there's always red flags. It's why I decided not to date Mr. X that I was talking about earlier, because once I realized just how disordered he was and what life would be like with that, there was absolutely no way that I could do that. I would be like subjecting myself to abuse and, mental torture, certainly, and just thumping boredom, having to listen to that all the time. So lack of empathy. With all the cluster Bs, it seems to be the consistency that draws us all together is this lack of empathy to one degree or another. With the NPDs, it's more like, from what I read anyway, it's not that they can't feel empathy, it's that they choose not to be empathetic towards people. Whereas if you're ASPD, like myself, it's more of an inability to have the emotional empathy, as opposed to, like, you can do cognitive empathy, but emotional not so much. But when you're NPD, you just choose to ignore the empathetic side of yourself, and you can make yourself become callous that way, certainly, through just behaving in this manner. It's like, you kind of become the way you act. Envy towards others, or belief that others are envious of them. The people who they misbehave, and, and then someone doesn't like them anymore, and they're like, oh, they're just jealous, when it's clearly not the case, that sort of behavior. And the envy towards others is not something that someone with NPD is going to admit. Rather, they will try to sabotage that person or put that person down and be like, I hate them, they're a bitch, that kind of thing, because they're the ones who are jealous in reality. And also, again, like that envy, that sense of like coveting what someone else has or the way someone else is, it can also be an impetus for them to try to, emulate those people, and to achieve their goal of becoming more like them, which, or whatever traits that they like about that person, instead of putting them down, instead they can maybe befriend them and learn how to be more like them, that sort of thing. But would be a healthy choice. So, and some NPDs are able to make those choices. Again, if it's, therapy is really good for that sort of thing. And the last one is arrogant, haughty behaviors and attitudes. I think that's fairly self-explanatory, and of course that would be happening. I gotta put this computer down. So, those are the criteria to be diagnosed with NPD, and clearly it's not just a simple diagnosis. You can't just walk around saying that everybody is a narcissist because, Becky pissed you off and Ron is a dick, you know what I'm trying to say. It's not a catch-all phrase for people being assholes to you. And neither is gaslighting. Gaslighting is a specific behavior. Actually, a little bit of trivia, the term gaslighting is from a 1930s movie, I believe, and it was called Gaslighting. And it was about a man who was trying to drive his wife crazy. I believe it was because he wanted to leave her for another woman, but I might be wrong about that. But he wanted to drive her nuts in order to, drive her to suicide or whatever it was. And so one of the things he would do, because it was back in the time when they had gaslight, he would turn down the light after she had turned it on, and then she'd come back in the room and be like, didn't I just turn that light on? And he'd say, honey, that light hasn't been touched all day since you turned it on. And just little by little, he'd pick away at her sense of sanity and sense of reality by denying the reality around her, denying things that he had done, to the point where, she questioned her own reality, questioned her own sanity, and because she assumed this person had her best interests at heart and loved her. And that's what gaslighting is when someone that you trust and you believe has your best interests at heart and you believe loves you will bit by bit erode at your sense of self-worth and erode at your sense of reality, where you start to question if you're the one who's nuts by even thinking that they're abusive. Well, maybe they're not abusive. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm making this up. It's a very common tactic for abusive people to use. But then again, not all abusers abusers. Not all abusers are narcissists, so there's also that. But they can use gaslighting as a technique and a tactic, and it's very common. Now, I mentioned that my mother was a grandiose narcissist, and so growing up with her was definitely an experience. She was the head of a large animal rights organization, and so she was on the news, of course, and on the radio relatively frequently. And she had this absolute presence that was just, no one can control a room or, take over a room the way a narcissist can, and that's exactly what she would do. The minute she entered the room, all the focus was on her at all times. And so what happened when I started to become a little bit older and started to become a teenager, like get secondary sex characteristics, basically. At that point, I think out of a sense of not wanting competition, which you notice that with some mothers and daughters, and it's usually with narcissist mothers. That sense of competition, she would start calling me ugly and fat all the time. And ugly and fat, and like always rip apart my appearance. No matter what I wore, it was the wrong thing. If I tried to wear makeup, I was a whore. If I talked to a boy, I was a whore. But the way I looked was just, there was always something wrong with the way that I looked and my weight. Just everything, usually about just my appearance. It was always surface stuff, which really, in many ways, well, first of all, it helped me to develop a really good eating disorder in the beginning, but also what also helped that was being a ballerina for a while and being a model and stuff like that doesn't help either. And there's also this thing she used to do with food that was even probably more of an impetus for me to have an eating disorder, but it was just an abusive thing she did. It was weird, but and I don't want to get into like all the abusive, crazy things that she did, because this isn't about my mom. This is about narcissism, but because I've got really close experiences with her, I can speak to it a bit. But yeah, they have like a lot of envy, like especially between the women, there can be a lot of envious behaviors, because they want to be the one who is the most beautiful in the room, the one that's most noticed, one that is, the most envied themselves, and so you can't be competition. And so I think that she viewed me as competition. My grandmother once told me that. That's what she suspected, and it made sense as I got older. And it could have been, it wouldn't matter how I look in reality. To her, I was a female, and I was potential competition for her, and I was going to become a teenager soon. And youth is, valued in this culture, and she was getting older, and it was, this whole perfect storm of horribleness. And so, yeah, it was a childhood and teenage years of just, constant being berated about how ugly I was and how worthless I was. But as I said, it was always centered around my looks. And so, like, I became very concerned about making sure I stayed thin enough, making sure that I looked perfect all the time. And up until the time when I decided that it was all bullshit. And that was around the age of, I'd say 14 or 15, when I decided to join the punk movement. And this was in the 80s, so there actually was a punk movement. And, dress in a completely, entirely different way, very unladylike, with short hair, which I still have to this day. Crazy as Susie and the Banshees makeup. And stop focusing on, like, this vision of perfection that she had of me, because it was just impossible to live up to. So that's kind of the way it affected me, and it made me kind of go in the opposite direction. And it also, interestingly to note, I've been reading that many NPD mothers or fathers, parents, will produce ASPD children. So that's an interesting correlation. I'm not really quite sure why that is. Maybe it's just because NPDs can be, when they're at their most abusive, can be so incredibly overwhelming, and the abuse can be very imaginative and intense because of their overwhelming sense of entitlement, that we just shut down completely and dissociate and lose certain parts of ourselves that are like become stunted down way when we're children. Like our emotional development is like completely stunted and perhaps damaged forever. It's interesting how it makes complete sense though, I mean, separating myself from it as a person who went through it, even just looking at it is from a scientific standpoint, it really is a fascinating thing that happens. So that's narcissism for you. I don't want to make this overly long. My last one was 45 minutes and I just rambled on and on. But I think I pretty much got across what I wanted to get across, which was that, narcissism is a complex disorder. It is more complicated than just someone being arrogant and, nasty to you. Gaslighting is something much more complex than someone just bullshitting you. And also the fact that since it exists in a spectrum, there can be a much healthier version of narcissism where they are very high achievers, very, very high, and they're, very critical of their own selves. But that sense of complete self-worth, lack of self-worth will develop into like a sense of making sure that they are their own personal best. So instead of being that self-hatred and self-criticism, it becomes like, hey, we need to do this, like they're their own best cheerleader, I guess is the way to put it. I don't know, I sound like an idiot saying that, but that's the best way I could conceive of it. So in narcissism, when it's bad, it's so bad, and it can be really difficult to be around people who are constantly just like nitpicking at you. And these are the ones who will like make really shitty comments, on your social media for no reason. You're like, who is this person? And like, why do they hate me so much? And there really isn't anything to do with you. It's all to do with them and their insecurities and, their self-hatred and their self-loathing. And, that's why they act out in that way. It's just their way of dealing with it. They don't have a healthier way of dealing with it. And it can be just difficult to be around, but they can also be really funny. I mean, my mother, for instance, had this wit that was, no one I've met since has a wit. She was like Dorothy Parker wit, just that good. And when she wanted to use it against somebody, man, it was like cut like a razor, like a surgical razor, and it would take her like 4 words to do it. But beyond that, she could be incredibly funny, just being delightfully funny, because it gave her attention, obviously. But, she had this incredible wit, this incredible talent. She was a very talented writer, a beautiful, beautiful woman. And so there's a lot of potential wasted there with her disorder just taking over the way it did. And instead, she became this like bitter, abusive woman who's now lives out in the middle of nowhere with like 16 dogs, and is alone, and her friends kind of left her one by one. I watched it happen because a couple of them noticed, never did anything about it, but they noticed the abuse and they couldn't handle being around it, so they left. But there's all this wasted potential with NPDs because most of them have the potential to be, what they want to be, what they envy so much, but they need to be organized enough and have enough real self-confidence, real sense of like, I can do this, to actually achieve that. And sometimes their sense of self-worth is just so damaged and so bad that all they can really do, all they have to hang on to are the fantasies, which is tragic, So, but on a positive note, as I said before, they can be just incandescently glorious people. So, we can just hope that the ones we encounter are like heading towards that end of the scale rather than the really dismal, abysmal version of that person. So, growing up with one was incredibly difficult. It was overwhelming in many ways because everybody was terrified of my mother, and imagine being a small child and dealing with that amount of terror. It caused me to dissociate. It caused me to have ASPD is what it did. That's what it did. So yeah, but it's one of the more interesting disorders, certainly, because of what they take that sense of insecurity and that sense of low self-worth from the abuse that they suffered, and they twist it around into something that is grotesque, until at the lowest end of the spectrum. But at the highest end of the spectrum, it can be the impetus to make them achieve everything they want to achieve in life, and just be able to turn around and be like, fuck you to their childhood, which I think is like the best outcome ever. So on that note, I am going to stop this video because I wanted to end it on a positive note because they're so demonized, And it's like, you know, I'm not trying to make excuses for the bad behavior. Trust me, that's not what I'm trying to do. Because I know that it's bad. I just got through telling you it's bad. I grew up with one. But there are also positives to all of these disorders. There's potential. There are varying degrees of dysfunction. And at the topmost, the uppermost, you know, pro-social and high-functioning level, these people can all still be in good relationships. They can be delightful to be around. They'll still be disordered, but they're not going to be abusing you. You know, like I'm always going to have ASPD, and I'm always going to have trouble accessing empathy and other things. I'm always going to be, you know, most likely not able to maintain a romantic relationship because it's just, for many, many reasons we'll get into later, but it is based on my disorder, certainly. But I am not a miserable person to be around, as I most likely, almost certainly was when I was younger. This destructiveness, you know, all those things. But we're not talking about me. You know, ASPD women can be a little narcissistic themselves. So I'm going to end it now. Finally, I've been saying that for like the last 10 minutes, but that is my narcissism piece, and I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If you have anything constructive to say down below, or any comments or any questions, please let me know. Just so you're aware, I don't respond to shitty comments. I have no interest in engaging with you, so I'll just delete you, and you know, unless you have something really constructive to say. And other than that, I'm willing to answer any questions, and it's loud outside. So I look forward to hearing from you all and seeing you all soon, and I'm glad to be finally getting this video done. You have no idea. I'll talk to you guys later.